Well, I got my next guest who is totally worth waiting for, Corey DeAngelis, who's going to talk to us about where education choice will be at on the ballot this year in the midterms. Let's talk to Corey now, joining us live and on camera. Good morning, Corey. How are you, sir?
Hey, Austin, doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thanks so much, Corey. I mean, I've been excited to see you making your way around the country, fighting for education choice. Certainly, it's become an enormous issue in the last couple of years as more and more children we have seen have suffered the negative consequences of the mismanagement of our education policy. It's led to sweeping victories for governors in places like Virginia and elsewhere. And now, with less than 24 hours until the midterm elections will be decided, Corey, where is education reform or school choice or our best prospects for progress in education at on the ballot?
Yeah, look, you're right. We've already seen some victories, including in places like Virginia, where Glenn Youngkin won on the issue of education in a state that went 10 points to Biden just the year before. When we're looking at the midterms this year, I've been looking at the governor's races. I mean, these governor's races could lead to drastic education reform in certain places like Wisconsin. So you have incumbent Tony Evers, for example, a Democrat, vetoed a ton of education reform bills, including school choice for all earlier this year. It would have expanded, kind of like in Arizona, where they have every family, regardless of income, can take their kids' education dollars to the public, private, or charter school of their choosing. Tony Evers was sent a bill to do that. It was vetoed, and Real Clear Politics projects that Evers is going to lose to as a Republican opponent, Tim Mickles, who's a huge supporter of school choice. So that would be a major shift in education freedom. Looking at Arizona, you have Carrie Lake. She's a staunch supporter of education freedom. She wants to expand, even though Arizona has the gold standard of school choice with all families eligible. She wants to increase the amount of funding that follows the child. Right now, it's just the state funding. Well, there's also local funding as well that the public schools currently get to keep in Arizona. So that would be a shift, a race that I'm watching tomorrow night. One of the biggest upsets, which would be, I think, even bigger than the Glenn Youngkin victory, would be Tudor Dixon in Michigan. She's running against Gretchen Whitmer, the Democrat incumbent, who locked down businesses for such a long time and even lied during the debate, the final debate, about how long schools were closed. She said kids were only out for 3 months. Kids were only out of school for 3 months. And that's just verifiably false. And even if it were true, it came off as if she was downplaying the damage done to kids by keeping them out of school for so long. Looking at congressional seats, I mean, look, I think Republicans might have a red wave that's so big that they take both chambers, the Senate and the House. Obviously, Joe Biden would still be president. So not much is going to change at the federal level on the school choice front. And most of the action on school choice that's important anyway is at the state level. Even if we did have all three branches with GOP control, then the federal funding of K-12 education is only about 8 or 9% of the total pie. So you get more bang for your buck if you're focusing your efforts at the state level anyway.
Certainly a good argument for paying attention to what's going on in your state and local politics. If you're just tuning into the show, we're speaking to Corey DeAngelis about where education choice might be on the ballot. He's pointing to a lot of these gubernatorial races. I thought it was interesting, Corey, this was a big story last week, was the article in The Atlantic by Emily Oster, where she was calling for what she called a pandemic amnesty. You're already shaking your head, but one of the big issue that she admitted that her and other liberals and Democrats were wrong about was how they handled education, was how they handled schooling. So, Corey, are you prepared to grant Emily Oster amnesty on this issue?
I'm definitely not granting Randy Weingarten and the teachers unions amnesty for holding children's education hostage to secure multiple multi-billion-dollar ransom payments from the taxpayer. I mean, look, you had private businesses fighting to reopen. You had the private schools fighting to reopen. In California, you had a Christian private school in Sacramento that even rebranded itself as a daycare to get around the government's stupid regulations that applied to closing schools, but not daycares, because for whatever reason, COVID could get you if you're learning something in that same building. But if you were just at a daycare, it was totally fine. I mean, the private schools, private businesses, they all wanted to reopen because they knew if they had to keep their doors closed, they might have to remain closed for good. The public schools knew that they can get your money regardless of the tax system, but it was even worse because they knew that they could get financial benefits from remaining closed. They could say, oh, we're closed because we don't have enough money, even though we spend over $16,000 per kid per year, much higher than average private school tuition. So no pandemic amnesty, especially because the other side doesn't want to forget, doesn't want to admit that they did anything wrong. Until then, we shouldn't even talk about pandemic amnesty. And look, no, I think Democrats want this to happen right now, and they're trying to distance themselves from the school closures because they don't want to lose on Tuesday. They don't want to lose tomorrow, and they know that keeping the schools closed was deeply unpopular at this moment, and no one's forgetting what happened. Parents haven't forgotten. Parents were right there with their kids. And the one side benefit, though, of the closures was that parents got to see that they were sending their kids to institutions that were brainwashing them to hate them for 13 years, which is another part of the conversation as to why support for school choice has jumped so much in recent years, is that parents got to see another dimension of school quality, which is whether that school's curriculum aligns with their values. And look, Vodi Bakum said it best. We got to stop sending our kids to Caesar and then acting surprised when they come back as Romans. Parents saw that their kids were coming back as Romans, or they were at least learning things that weren't aligned with their values, and families are pushing back. They're a new special interest group when it comes to K-12 education. Forever, it was just the employee unions, but now the kids have their own union and they're called parents. But the only way that things are ever going to change if those parents show up at the school board meetings, but then continue to show up at the ballot box tomorrow on Tuesday. They need to hold politicians accountable so that this never happens again. Maybe then we can think about pandemic amnesty, but you need some accountability at the same time.
I love that quote. Don't be surprised when you give your children to be educated by Caesar that they come back as Romans. I like that quote. I think I like. It reminds me a little bit of another quote that I like from Malcolm X, who said, "Never let your enemy teach your children." If you're just teaching, if you're just listening to the show and tuning in now, we're speaking to Corey DeAngelis. Corey is the senior fellow at School Choice Now, and a senior fellow at the Reason Foundation. Corey, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a headline that you shared on your Twitter account at DeAngelis Corey, where it said that you say that school choice is a rising tide that lifts all boats. You call it a win-win solution. What do you mean?
Yeah, competition works in K-12 education just like it does in every other sector, every other industry. When parents get a choice to choose the education that works best for their kids and aligns with their values, and the money follows the child, well, suddenly you have bottom-up accountability. The public schools up their game in response to competition, and there have been 28 studies on this topic. That's all that's the total number of studies, and 25 of the 28 studies find statistically significant positive effects of private school choice on public school outcomes. The competition is a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's a win-win solution. And obviously the families who get a choice benefit. That's why they're making the choice. But the kids who remain in the public schools, their outcomes improve as well. And there's been a small subset of studies, about 5 of them, that I've written about in a blog at the Washington Examiner called School Choice Benefits Teachers Too. All 5 of the studies find that private and charter school competition lead to higher teacher salaries in the public schools. So school choice benefits kids and families, obviously, but also benefits the kids who remain in the public schools and the teachers as well, because whether we like it or not, the government school system is not just a monopoly, it's also a monopsony in the labor market. Competition in the market for goods and services benefits customers. Competition in the labor market benefits employees. I mean, just think about the trends over time. In the public school system in America, since 1970, we've increased per pupil education expenditures by about 152% after adjusting for inflation. Teacher salaries have only increased by about 8% in real terms. So when I hear the teachers complaining about digging into their pockets, and maybe they're not earning enough in a certain area after being in the system for so long, and they're so upset with the red tape and the bureaucracy of the government school system, I kind of feel bad for them. But the problem isn't with their competition. The problem is with their employer. It's a monopoly, monopsony in the labor market.
It's interesting, fascinating stuff. Corey, is there anything else that you think our listeners should know before I let you go? Anything about the midterms or anything that you'd like to plug?
I mean, we need to look at, we're going to see the new shift in leadership and legislatures all across the country, and it'll be fun to look at what's happening this session. But look, Arizona just went all in. They have the slimmest of GOP majorities. They have a 1-seat majority in the Senate and the House. They have the governor's office. It's a purple state in Arizona, the slimmest of majorities, and they just went all in on school choice, the gold standard. Every single family, regardless of income, background, or zip code, can take their kids' education dollars to the public, private, charter, or home-based option for their kids. And if Arizona can do it, every red state should be able to do it in the country. So I'm looking at you, Florida. I'm looking at you, Missouri. I'm looking at you, Texas. Abbott's finally leading on the issue. He's pushing for school choice. He even said in January that this was going to be the swiftest, most powerful push for school choice in Texas history. They have much stronger GOP majorities than in Arizona. If Arizona can do it, states like Texas should be able to do it as well. It is on the Republican Party platform. 88% of Texas Republican primary voters went to the ballot in March of this year, saying they support a school choice proposition, which was up 9 percentage points since 2018. There's been a sea change in support for school choice. Parents have woken up. They're never going back to sleep. And we should, politicians would be wise to listen to these parents going forward if they want to have political success as well. It is politically disastrous. I would say a form of political suicide at this point to come out against parental rights in education. So we'll see what happens tomorrow on election day, but parents are the change agent here. And every state should go all in and empower all parents like they did in Arizona.
That's right. Parents are the change agent. Corey DeAngelis, the tip of the spear in the fight for education freedom. Corey, thank you very much for your time today. We're grateful to have you.
Totally. Thank you, Austin.